Right now, somewhere in this country, a DVLA enforcement team is clamping a car roughly every 3.5 minutes. And in one single city alone, up to 900 vehicles are being immobilized every single month. This isn't a rare crackdown, it's routine, ongoing enforcement, and thousands of drivers are getting caught out, despite the process being genuinely simple to avoid. Let's break down exactly how this works, what actually happens once your vehicle's flagged, and why so many people end up losing their car entirely over what started as a missed renewal date. Every vehicle kept or driven on a public road in this country has to be taxed, formerly known as vehicle excise duty, unless it's been properly declared off the road through a SORN. The DVLA's own figures show the vast majority of drivers, around 98.7%, keep this up to date without any issue at all. But that remaining small percentage still adds up to a genuinely large number of vehicles, and more than 150,000 untaxed vehicles were clamped across the UK last year alone, generating around £110 million in enforcement revenue that goes straight back to the Treasury. Here's how the DVLA actually finds these vehicles, because it's worth understanding just how automated this process has become and why it rarely relies on chance or bad luck. ANPR-equipped patrol vehicles drive routes across the country, specifically checking number plates against the DVLA's database in real time, flagging any vehicle where the tax record doesn't match up. This isn't officers manually checking paperwork, it's continuous, database-driven enforcement running in the background of ordinary patrol activity, which is exactly why an untaxed vehicle sitting on a residential street, not even being driven anywhere, can still get caught. The DVLA's enforcement teams work alongside dedicated wheel clamping contractors, and under what's called the devolved power partner scheme, local authorities and police forces can carry out clamping too, meaning the enforcement net is considerably wider than DVLA staff alone. Once a vehicle is identified as untaxed, the process moves through a series of escalating steps, and each one is genuinely avoidable right up until the final stage. Initially, you'll typically receive reminder letters as your renewal date approaches, giving you the chance to sort it before anything actually happens. Miss that window entirely, and the vehicle continues untaxed. An £80 fine applies, though this drops to £40 if paid within 28 days, which is exactly the kind of early discount that makes sorting it out immediately clearly worth doing. Ignore that stage 2, and DVLA can issue what's called an out-of-court settlement, calculated as £30 plus 1.5 times the outstands tax owed. Push it further into genuine non-compliance, and DVLA can prosecute through the courts, where fines rise substantially, potentially reaching up to £1,000 depending on the circumstances and how long the vehicle's been left untaxed. The clamping itself is usually the point where people finally take this seriously, because it's the moment the consequence becomes physically impossible to ignore rather than just another letter sitting in a pile of post. When enforcement teams identify an untaxed vehicle, particularly one that hasn't responded to earlier reminders, they attach a wheel clamp directly at the roadside. A notice is left on the vehicle explaining exactly why it's been clamped and what needs to happen next, typically requiring you to tax the vehicle and pay a release fee, currently around £100, before the clamp comes off. If nobody responds within a set period, usually 24 hours, the vehicle isn't just left clamped indefinitely. It gets loaded onto a truck and taken to an impound. This is where the situation genuinely escalates for a lot of owners, because a car sitting in a DVLA compound isn't accumulating goodwill, it's accumulating cost. Storage charges apply for every single day the vehicle remains in the pound, on top of the original tax owed and the release fee, and vehicles that sit unclaimed long enough are ultimately either auctioned off or, for cars deemed to have little remaining value, crushed entirely. Pound managers report that some owners genuinely do the maths on an older vehicle and decide it's simply not worth the accumulated fees to get it back, effectively walking away from a car rather than paying to release it. There's a specific behavior worth flagging that's becoming more common and carries its own separate risk entirely. Some drivers, on finding their car clamped, have taken to removing the clamp themselves rather than going through the proper release process, and recent figures show roughly 28,000 drivers did exactly this last year. Beyond simply not resolving the underlying tax issue, illegally removing a DVLA clamp is a criminal offense in its own right, and doing so doesn't make the original untaxed status disappear. It just adds an entirely new legal problem stacked on top of the one you already had. It's worth understanding where enforcement is concentrated most heavily, because certain areas genuinely see far more clamping activity than others. London leads the country by a wide margin, followed by Manchester, Birmingham, and then, somewhat surprisingly given its size, Cardiff, which recorded more clamping incidents last year than considerably larger cities including Glasgow, Edinburgh, Bristol, and Sheffield combined for that specific measure. In Newport alone, enforcement teams have been immobilizing as many as 900 vehicles a month, with the local compound holding around 100 vehicles at any given time. Wherever you're based, it's worth knowing this isn't a distant, occasional operation. It's active, ongoing enforcement, running continuously in most parts of the country. There's an important connection worth understanding between untaxed vehicles and other compliance issues too, because the two rarely exist in isolation from each other. Industry figures have pointed out that untaxed vehicles are disproportionately likely to also be uninsured, without a valid MOT, and carrying other unresolved traffic penalties, precisely because a driver who's let one piece of compliance slide has often let several slide simultaneously. This matters practically because it means an untaxed vehicle stopped or clamped at the roadside frequently triggers a wider set of problems beyond just the immediate tax issue. Insurance and MOT status often get checked and flagged at the same time once a vehicle's already under scrutiny. It's worth understanding what enforcement teams actually find when a persistently unclaimed vehicle finally gets cleared out of a compound, because it explains part of why this crackdown gets treated as more than just a revenue exercise. Pound managers and enforcement staff have reported finding weapons, significant amounts of cash, and illegal drugs during clearances of vehicles left unclaimed for extended periods. That doesn't mean every untaxed car hides something serious. The overwhelming majority genuinely are ordinary vehicles belonging to people who simply missed a renewal date or couldn't afford to settle the fees to get their car back. But it's part of why road safety groups and the DVLA itself have consistently linked untaxed vehicle enforcement to broader road safety and public safety concerns, rather than treating it purely as an administrative matter about unpaid fees. There's also a specific exemption structure worth knowing about, because not every vehicle sitting apparently untaxed on a public road is actually breaking the rules. Disabled drivers can qualify for vehicle tax exemption depending on the specific benefits they receive, and vehicles built more than 40 years ago qualify for historic vehicle tax exemption, meaning they're legitimately exempt from paying the standard rate, even though they still need to be formally registered as such with the DVLA. If you fall into either category, it's still worth confirming your vehicle is correctly registered under the relevant exemption, because an exemption that hasn't been properly applied for on paper can still result in a vehicle showing up as untaxed on an ANPR check, even though you genuinely qualify for the exemption if the paperwork were in order. The DVLA has been genuinely upfront about wanting to avoid clamping wherever possible, and it's worth taking that at face value rather than assuming it's purely enforcement theater. Chief Executive Tim Moss has been direct about the fact that most drivers keep their tax current without issue, and that clamping is presented as very much a last resort after reminders have already gone unanswered. The organization has run public information campaigns specifically aimed at reducing these numbers, including one featuring an anthropomorphic talking wheel clamp designed to make the consequences memorable in a way a standard reminder letter often isn't. Beneath the slightly unusual marketing approach, the underlying message is consistent. Taxing a vehicle takes only a couple of minutes online and can be spread across monthly or 6-monthly payments, or set up entirely automatically through direct debit, specifically so a renewal date never gets missed in the first place. So let's bring this together into something you can actually check today, rather than risk becoming part of next year's clamping statistics. If you're at all unsure when your vehicle tax is due, check it directly through the DVLA's online service, rather than assuming a reminder letter will definitely reach you in time, since post can go astray or get overlooked among other mail. If you've got an older vehicle sitting unused that you haven't formally declared off the road, either tax it properly or submit a SORN, because an untaxed vehicle simply parked on your own driveway can still trigger enforcement if it's ever driven, even briefly. Setting up direct debit removes the renewal date risk entirely going forward, spreading the cost while ensuring you're never the one relying on remembering an annual deadline. If you believe you genuinely qualify for a disability or historic vehicle exemption, confirm it's properly registered with the DVLA, rather than assuming the exemption applies automatically. And if you ever do find a clamp on your vehicle, resolve it through the proper channels immediately, rather than removing it yourself, because that specific shortcut consistently makes the overall situation considerably worse rather than better. It's worth ending on the financial reality for anyone tempted to simply ignore the whole process and hope it resolves itself. Between the original tax owed, escalating fines, the release fee, and daily storage charges accumulating in the pound, a vehicle that started with a relatively modest missed renewal can end up costing several times the original tax bill by the time it's finally recovered, assuming it's even worth recovering by that point. For genuinely low-value older vehicles, some owners have made the calculated decision that walking away is cheaper than paying to get the car back, which is precisely the outcome the DVLA's escalating warning system is specifically designed to help every driver avoid, provided they act at any point before the vehicle actually reaches the compound. None of this is designed to suggest DVLA enforcement is unreasonable or excessive. The vast majority of drivers genuinely do keep their tax current without any trouble at all, and the escalating warning process gives ample opportunity to resolve things before a clamp ever gets near your wheel. But the numbers make clear this isn't some rare, unlucky outcome reserved for a handful of deliberately non-compliant drivers. It's routine, ongoing enforcement catching thousands of otherwise ordinary people every single month, often over what started as nothing more than a missed reminder or a genuinely forgotten renewal date. It's worth remembering just how quick the actual fix is, because that contrast is really the whole point of this video. Taxing a vehicle online genuinely takes a couple of minutes, checkable and payable at any time of day or night, every day of the year, either through the DVLA's website or by phone. Compared against the alternative, escalating fines, a clamp at the roadside, a vehicle sitting in a compound racking up daily charges, and in the worst cases a car ultimately crushed rather than reclaimed, the couple of minutes it takes to check and renew is about as lopsided a trade-off as exists anywhere in UK driving law. If this helped you understand exactly how this process works and what's actually at stake if it reaches you, hit subscribe, because I'll keep covering the DVLA rules and enforcement patterns that catch UK drivers out in ways they never expected. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.